So yeah, I've had definitely a couple of very interesting scenes. One, I had the person karaoke Bohemian Rhapsody. But, you know, I mean, they're like dressed in this ridiculous outfit and they can't sing a lick. And here they are just having to like belt it out, like no real accompaniment, just like going for it. As a person who is a practicing professional, seeing this and seeing how they came to court, it just made me really angry because it's all just a shtick. You know, they're trying to get attention. They're doing all of this very stereotyped behavior, the way that they speak, the way that they dress, coming into court in very inappropriate attire. One thing that I say across the board is, you know, scenes and sessions and playtime get better the more you know the person. So the more you know them, the more you know how to navigate situations, and the more comfortable you also feel pushing boundaries. Sometimes people come to me, they're like, I want to try this, I want to try that, I've never done this. I was like, whoa, I don't know you.
What's up, guys? This time I sit down with Mistress Natalie, and this is her second time on the podcast. Mistress Natalie is a dominatrix based in NYC who travels all over the country, and she specializes in luxury domination, BDSM and kink, and medical play. You might remember Mistress Natalie from her first appearance on the AUXORO Podcast, where we got more into the stories surrounding her life's work and you know, how she came to be a dominatrix. For this episode, we're exploring dominatrix stories in pop culture. We get into a dominatrix group who wanted to open a public dungeon on taxpayer dollars. We talk about the trend of baby boomers using BDSM to spice things up in the bedroom. Mistress Natalie gives her take on a kinky scene from the movie Eurotrip. We get into the Armie Hammer accusations and how it has to do with the world of BDSM and kink, and more. If you'd like to support the AUXORO Podcast, please subscribe to and rate the show on YouTube and Spotify. This is a huge help for getting the word out about the podcast because the more ratings and subscribers we have, the more the Overlord algorithm will suggest our show to other people who may be interested in it. You can also join AUXORO Premium for $5 a month, where you get bonus episodes, subscriber-only AMAs, mini-sodes, the ability to become part of the show, and that is at auxoro.supercast.com. Thank you for however you choose to support, and without further ado, please enjoy this deep diving, wide-ranging episode with Mistress Natalie. I was thinking, and by the way, we're in Mistress Natalie's dominatrix dungeon right now in New York City, coming to you from the dungeon. And as I was setting up my podcast equipment, I was taking out the microphones, the stands, and I was like, this has to be about the lamest thing that's ever been set up in this room. Like if you're taking out like sticks or you're taking out like just things that look like they could be used for BDSM, and then you're like, oh, by the way, this is just a microphone. It's like this is a total letdown. This is just podcast equipment.
Yeah, but that's okay because, you know, DOMs are very resourceful. You know, we shop at what we call Dom Depot instead of Home Depot, and everything has a different purpose than probably what it is intended for. I'm sure I can find lots of fun things to do with your microphones.
Oh, yeah. What does a Dom Depot look like? Describe to me what I would see when I'm walking into a Dom Depot, and how is it set up with the different aisles and the layout and everything like that?
Well, I mean, as you walk through Home Depot, the things that most people are going to be using to construct something, build something, we're probably thinking about how we can torture some various body parts or rig some sort of bondage or what we can strap down. And so we just have a very different perspective of what things can be used for. Clips, clamps, all sorts of stuff. And we're like, oh, this could go. Oh, this is really, yeah.
Have you ever had an experience in a session? Maybe you're traveling, you forget something, a necessary piece of equipment, and you have to freestyle on the spot, and you see a lampshade in the corner of the hotel room, and you're like, That's the fucking blindfold or what? Or you, like, what have you ever had to freestyle during a session?
It's really funny because as somebody who's really used to having all of this available to me, when I first started traveling, it was very challenging because there's only so much that you can bring, and I was not accustomed to it. So going into every hotel room, you know, you kind of feel like MacGyver, like, what can I use to make the things happen? What can I hang? Oh, this bed doesn't have bedposts. Great. Now, like, what am I going to do? What am I going to find in the room? Is this door going to be stable enough? Can I hang an enema bag from this, you know, curtain rod, or is it not going to work? So you literally just go around looking at things like, what can I use to do what I want to do? It's actually kind of fun.
You could, I mean, that sounds super creative. You could be, it's like, obviously it's completely different things, but the image that popped up into my mind is an assassin that works for the CIA, and he forgot his weapon, and he's just looking around the room like, fuck, this guy's going to be home in 20 minutes. What can I use to strangle this guy? And you're obviously not doing it for uncontrolled violence. You're doing it for a very specific consensual situation, but you have I'm assuming you have similar thoughts where you're like, shit,
and you look at the furniture and like you get on the furniture, or at least I do, and you're like, okay, is this going to work for this position? You know, you lay on it, you put your legs back, you get on all fours, is this comfortable? How about if you bend over this? And you start rearranging things and like, oh, this table's really heavy, it could work for this. And so you just look at everything and start like testing the functionality of it for your purposes.
How important is it to be the most comfortable person in the room? Because I imagine when you first started, you have clients, and it's similar with whatever industry you're in, whether it's, you know, podcasting or being a lawyer on your first case or whatever it is, you're almost feigning confidence when you first start.
Imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Did you have a period where you had to fake the confidence in the session when you first started to make the other person feel like you're in charge, or did that just come naturally?
For about 10 years.
Wow.
I mean, I really, realistically, I was having this conversation, interestingly, the other day with somebody who's in the industry for only 3 years. And they're like, when do you find that, you know, confidence that you really believe? And I was like, honestly, 7 to 10 years.
Yeah, I mean,
to really feel like I know what the fuck I'm doing. I could do this with my eyes closed, one hand, you know, tied behind my back. But it takes a long time, and it's fake it till you make it until then. At least for me, you know. But I started when I was 18. So maybe I think if you come to it when you're more secure with yourself as a person and confident in yourself as a person, then it's probably less time. But for me, because I started so young, it took me a long time.
Yeah, I've heard similar timelines for other professions, especially in media, whether it's someone hosting a radio show or podcast, or someone who's trying to become a stand-up comic. They'll often say that you're a baby when you're 5 years in. And then 10 years in is like you're just getting your infancy, like you're learning to crawl. And then people that have been doing it for 20, 30 years are like, I am just like getting into my dominance now. Like I feel like after a couple decades in it, which I've not yet experienced with podcasting because I'm 5-6 years in at this point, but I do feel every time I do it, I feel more and more confident, but I do feel the shedding of that feigned comfortability a little bit, to the point where I'm like, oh yeah, I've done this before. I've done this, you know, dozens of times, hundreds of times, and now it just feels like a second nature thing.
Yeah, I definitely, it's funny hearing other professions feel the same, because that's just how I perceived it from my own experience.
Yeah, I love how I'm just like, yeah, so speaking of dominatrix, my own podcasting experience, so we were messaging a little bit back and forth before the recording, just talking about topics for today and what we think could be good to get into. And so just to lay out the structure of the episode, we'll get into a couple topics, and then we're also going to react to some things in the dominatrix pop culture. Mm-hmm. And I have a professional here, so she can tell me what my instincts are and if they're right, and, you know, where I'm probably wrong about reacting to things. So I'm glad that we have your professional eye with us here today. And then at the end, we'll do a little bit of a show and tell.
Love
and
it.
If the YouTube algorithm overlords are kind, you guys will get to see that. And if you don't, it'll probably be on Supercast or Patreon, and you guys can check it out there. So I thought a good place to start would be one of the topics that we were going back and forth about, which is like why people seek out a professional when it comes to BDSM, and like why people seek out a dominatrix. So when you're taking on new clients, what are some of the most common instincts or common, I don't know what the right word to say is, common, I guess like the things people say that compelled them to seek out a dominatrix when you're vetting them? What are some of the most common things that people will tell you?
Well, I think one of the big things that probably makes them seek out a professional over just maybe experimenting in their personal life is finding someone that has the skill set necessary to do the things that they would like done to them. And if you're just asking somebody that you're, involved with in whatever personal way that is, they probably have only the amount of information that you have, which isn't going to give you a lot of confidence that they're going to be able to do it well.
Yeah.
And the big thing about BDSM is trust. And if there isn't trust there, that the person is going to be able to do these things to you safely and sanely, then you're not going to be able to enjoy what's happening or relax into it. So finding out somebody who can actually do these things safely, whether it's bondage, there is tons of issues that can come up when you are doing bondage. Things can go really wrong. And if people aren't skilled in understanding that, it could be very dangerous. And that is true for a lot of things, maybe not so much from a safety standpoint, but just a comfortability standpoint where, hey, I want to try, some anal play or this or that. If someone doesn't know what they're doing, it could be very uncomfortable and be a real negative experience versus seeking a professional where it could be a very, very positive experience. And there is a lot going on in BDSM and kink where safety is a major issue. So,
do you find that there's a lot of people that are entering the industry, but they're not getting the proper training, or maybe they're not being upfront about how much they've been trained, and then people are getting hurt in sessions? Is that a thing that happens a lot?
I have to say, I am constantly so proud of this industry and how much it has changed in the 31 years that I've been in it, because for the first 10, 15 years, there was no code of ethics on what you did, what you said you could do. People were doing stuff with no training, not even trying to figure out how to do it. It was actually really scary and terrible.
That sounds scary. I mean, I'm looking at some of the toys on this wall that, we'll probably go through towards the end of the episode. But if you just handed me one of those belts or one of those masks, just something that I'm either wrapping around someone or putting inside them, and you said, all right, here, you do it, and I have zero training, I'm just like, I'm just going to guess which hole this goes in, and then if it hurts, you tell me to stop. Yeah.
It was a free-for-all. It was really terrible, but there's been such a massive shift. And right now, more than ever before, there are tons of platforms and wonderful people out there. There's a 7 Days of Domination, which does these lectures by very qualified people ranging every kind of topic. There's Baby Dom Boot Camp. There's books. There is so much information out there now. And not only is there information, the younger people who are getting into this industry want it. Yeah. They are very respectful of the people who've been in the industry and who have the skill set. I can't tell you how many times I've been contacted because one of my specialties is medical play for lessons. I want to learn this skill. Can you teach me? And it's across the board. So I will say that, and they're also very ethical in expressing their level of skill in a certain area and not saying that they're doing things in general that they can't do. Of course, like any industry, you're going to have your outliers. You're going to have your people who are doing it for the right reasons. And that's going to be in any industry. But yeah, the women and the non-binary humans and the men who are practicing this today are really doing it from wanting to be very conscientious about their profession and their craft. So yeah, it's great.
Do you think that as BDSM and kink is becoming more widely accepted and it's not seen, because I know back in the day BDSM and kink was in the DSM-5 handbook for like medical disorders, people who were interested in that, and obviously now medical science has advanced to the point where we realize that it's a sexuality preference, that there's nothing wrong with you if you are into BDSM or you're into sub-dom, whatever it is. Do you think that with the spreading of the acceptability that there's going to be like, I don't know, like North Carolina Dom University or something where it's like you could go to school to learn different types of kinks, but like actually in the future, if you grew up and you're like, I'm 18 years old, I want to be a dominatrix, and then you're going to go to school for 3 years to just train in, like North Carolina has high quality basketball gyms. You'll have a state-of-the-art dungeon and train as a dominatrix.
I would love to think that our country would allow something like that, but with our still very puritanical views on a lot of things, I don't think it'll be that widely accepted. But I do think that the availability of quality information is going to continue to grow. It is becoming much more accepted. I think people's sexuality in general is becoming more accepted, and as that hopefully flourishes over the years, then we'll see more opportunities for people to learn and grow.
Yeah. So one of the other things that we spoke about before we started recording was expanding the concept of sex and how being a dominatrix can expand the concept of what the average person may or may not consider a sexual thing or sexual preference. And I wrote this down because this image came to my mind when you sent me that message about being a dom expanding your concept of sex, is the photo of the astronauts on the moon, but looking back at the Earth. And the Earth, once you see the Earth as a blue marble, you'll never be able to look at the Earth the same way again. It just totally changes your perception of where you are as an astronaut, as a human being. And, maybe that sounds over deep or like I'm philosophizing too much, but like I genuinely wanted to ask, with your experience being a dom, do you feel almost like a sexual astronaut where you are just looking at things from a place where the average person is just never going to experience, and because of that your concept is just totally different?
Oh, definitely. I can't believe all of the things that I've been exposed to over the years that have just made my point of reference go from this much to like this huge range. And it's only been through experiencing all of these things with different people and understanding that we have a capacity for so much more than we give ourselves credit for. And, we like to label everything and put everything into a nice little box. But when you kind of let all of that go and you just experience things, you realize like, oh my goodness, all of this is in what can be considered something that's sexual. And it's great because there are lots of times when things come up in life where traditional sex is not going to work. And if you only have this narrow focus of this is what sex is, then you're really selling yourself short and you're not experiencing so many things that could be absolutely wonderful. So if you open up your mind to what sex can be, then all of a sudden you have all of these other great options.
Yeah, I've been thinking more about that recently, where like if no one ever showed you what sex looked like and you didn't have you weren't viewing pornography when you were a kid and you just were like a blank slate when it came to sex, and then you got together with another person and you just wanted to express intimacy, there would be so much more than just the traditional missionary doggy style cowgirl, like whatever the big three positions are for people. And I wonder for myself how much of the preferences that I have are me just sort of sucking in the normalizations like a vacuum into my own psyche and being like, well, this is the Overton window. This is what's accepted. And I've never really explored outside that. And so that's like the only moves I have. Kind of like as a baseball player, I'm very washed up now. But until someone shows you another pitch and you throw it and you're like, holy shit, like I didn't know a baseball could move like that.
Yeah.
That curveball grip was insane. Let me, show me how you do that. That's insane. I wonder how much of that and how much the average person who's never experienced a dominatrix session or just any sort of BDSM or kink in general is missing out or just like not fully expressing the capacity of their intimacy. They're at like 20 to 30% when there's just like another 80% that you could unlock.
It's true. And the desire, though, has to be there. Some people are really content and happy with their 20%, and there's nothing wrong with it. That is just who they are. They don't have the need in them or the desire or the curiosity to explore that other 80% that's possible. And that's wonderful because they are really happy. But for people who do want more and who are curious, kind of overcoming the fear or the anxiety or the potential moral issues or whatever could be, an obstacle for them to explore. If they can get over that and start to see all of the other things that are out there, then, things can really, really open up and become very exciting.
Yeah. Let's get into some of the reactions, because a lot of this has to play off the openness and just how people are introduced to the BDSM world in general. And so the first story that I want to pull up is a Florida dominatrix group that wanted the city council to build a dungeon. And I believe this is from 2022. So the title of the article is Florida Dominatrix Group Demands $250,000 Dungeon from Local City Council. It reads, to one dominatrix, some South Florida lawmakers have been misbehaving lately. A dominatrix trio headed by their latex leader, only known as Miss Cave, showed up to a city commission meeting in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Tuesday, and demanded the creation of a dungeon so local, doms and subs can let loose their kinky selves. The odd request happened as the city's commissioners were reviewing a nearly $1 million contract for a waste processing plant with Waste Management. Quote, I find it interesting that you would spend almost $1 million to hide your secrets down the drain, Miss Cave, in front of the local lawmakers, said while wearing a full latex suit with only her mouth visible. I propose that you use $250,000 of that million to support doms and subs in Broward County. Build a dungeon created for us, by us, the taxpayers and voting citizens. So should the United States government fund dominatrix dungeons?
This is absurd. I mean, there's it, and it as a person who is a practicing professional, seeing this and seeing how they came to court, it just made me really angry because it's all just a shtick. They're trying to get attention. They're doing all of this very stereotyped behavior, the way that they speak, the way that they dress, coming into court in very inappropriate attire. Like, that is just a total gimmick to get attention for whatever thing that they are doing, like some club or some shit down in Florida, and to get the public eye to notice that they exist.
Yeah.
But really, it has nothing to do with dom subs or BDSM and kink. Yes, there should be acceptance, but you don't go about it that way at all. And I know people, and it really makes me mad because I know a lot of people who are doms and who are sex workers who advocate for us being a legitimate, business and career and have rights. And it just so offsets that. And these people work really hard with legislators and people in their community, and they do all of the right things. And to have people go dressed like this and be really disrespectful in the way they address people, it's terrible.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
I mean, it is hilarious.
In my opinion.
I agree with if you're going to get something passed like this and you're dealing with lawmakers who are used to people showing up in ties and pantsuits, and you show up in, I don't know if is there a name for what she was wearing? The thing where you just have your mouth exposed?
Stupid. What she was wearing in a courtroom does not belong.
So if you're going to try to get a law passed by lawmakers who, you know, they're just looking at people all day that are dressed business professional, and then you show up in a suit where you're just covered in latex and your mouth is exposed and you're talking, right away, like, you're giving half of the people up there a heart attack for sure. Like, an 85-year-old congressman from North Carolina probably doesn't even know what he's looking at. And then other people are just going to be like, you know, I'm like, you're so
they're discrediting themselves by looking like that.
Yeah.
I mean, you just, and also I think she may have said something like slave or this or that. It's like, these people aren't your subs. Like, you don't talk to people who haven't consented to be in a DS relationship like they're your submissive. Like, you don't go and treat other people the way you would treat a consensual submissive.
Yeah. So
you just don't do that.
So showing up, essentially turning the courtroom into a dungeon, you know, is not the way to get the government to pay for a local dungeon. If that's what your true goal was.
Yeah. No.
If you had the opportunity to show up to court and fight for, let's say, you know, the government was thinking about passing a law to make public dungeons in New York City, or just like some version of what they were doing in Broward County, you would show up in, you know, civilian clothes,
appropriate attire.
Yes.
And also, you know, she is putting this like stereotype of that's what a dom looks like. Trust me, there are plenty of doms who wouldn't wear that if you paid them, and they would be like, no. So, you know, obviously they're doing it as this gimmick to just get attention. Yeah.
It's not, I mean, if you were trying to push forward the BDSM movement with local law enforcement or just politicians in general, that does not seem like the way to do it. That seems more like you were saying, like a shock and awe thing, where you're just trying to make a statement.
Completely counterproductive.
Get in the
makes
news.
You look like a joke. It makes you look unprofessional. Like, it's really, truly counterproductive.
Yeah.
No one's going to take you seriously.
Yeah. And I'm sure, like, maybe not in Broward County, but, and I don't know if this is a stereotype just because of all the shows that I've seen where politicians are going to BDSM dungeons and they don't tell their wives about it. But I'm sure there was a guy up there that goes to BDSM dungeons regularly, and he sees this girl walking in the latex suit, and he's like, look, I've been doing this for decades. I'm not intimidated by you. You're the one who's messing up the relationship right now. I do this every weekend. You're the one who's acting inappropriately, and I'm just gonna, you know, shut this down right now.
Yeah, it was silly. It was just, you know, attention.
So, speaking of BDSM dungeons, the baby boomers apparently are having a spike in BDSM use, or at least according to people that have been doing these surveys. So this article is called 50 Shades of Gray Hair. Baby boomers use BDSM to spice up the bedroom. You know, the person who wrote this article was so proud of that title. They were like, we need something 50 Shades of Gray. Gray, fucking hair. 50 Shades of Gray hair.
It's pretty good.
It's good. Yeah. It definitely gets the point across for sure. So baby boomers are experimenting with 50 Shades of Gray, and not just their hair color. Older New Yorkers are booking more appointments for bondage discipline, dominant submission, and sadism masochism, or BDSM, according to a Manhattan dominatrix. Miss Kitty LaRue, a dom at a Manhattan dungeon, told the Post her boomer clients her boomer clients want to learn how to please their partner and unpack years of sexual oppression. Miss Kitty, whose sessions start at $2.55 an hour and can span 12 hours, has said the consensual kink is like emotional therapy, but costs less than a shrink. What is your record for session length, by the way?
Well, I mean, in those 12 hours that say, she says, there's generally breaks, you know,
Yeah.
you have to eat, you have to drink, you have to do all of
Yeah.
that sort of stuff. I've actually had multi-day sessions.
Wow.
But again, there's sort of an ebb and flow to the activities and the intensity of the activity.
Gotcha.
But you sort of stay in that DS dynamic, even if you're out in public or dinner or this or that. And it's nothing that's necessarily really blatant. It could be very subtle things that are discussed in advance what's appropriate, because again, you don't want to bring other people into your kink. So if it goes outside of whatever space you're in, if it's over several days, there's certain understanding of what's acceptable and not acceptable. But yeah, a couple of days.
So it's more like if it's a session that's that long, if it's multiple days, it's more like the life you're living as a sub. Your client would be living as a sub. You're living as a dom. You're doing things like going out to eat or going to the grocery store, things like that. But you're staying, like you said, in that dynamic, in that relationship.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
That makes sense. So Miss Kitty LaRue, she says, we're like sex therapists, noting that sessions often involve more talk than action. There has been a, quote, influx of people coming in from all ages and backgrounds since the isolation days of the pandemic, including women and married couples. Sessions can be healing for clients with past sexual trauma because they can play out painful memories but give them a different end, said Dylan Gong, another dom. Gong said that they were healed by BDSM, which ranges from light spanking to choking and rope bondage. So is BDSM, is this a way to heal trauma that has been repressed, or even like generational trauma? Have you had clients that come to you that maybe they're in the baby boomer age range where it's like, we did not grow up with this. This is considered taboo from our generation, but this is something that we're going to get into now. We're going to explore.
So there's definitely a lot, going on in what they're saying. First is the age thing about the boomers and them coming.
Yeah.
I have found that, because I have been doing this for a long time, that yes, people in that age group definitely participate. I don't know if all of a sudden they're like coming to it now. I think honestly they've been into it for a while. So I don't think that all of a sudden there's an influx of that age group. But I do definitely agree that post-COVID, there is an influx of people in general, across age, across gender, across relationship status. So yes, more couples, more women, more people of all different age groups coming to this after the pandemic, for obvious reasons. You realize just how precious life is, and if there's things that you want to explore, I should get to it, because we don't know what's around the corner. So definitely, for sure, I've seen a lot of that, and I've seen a lot of people who had hid this from partners during the pandemic, opening up to their partners and telling their partners that this was a part of themselves, and then either coming as a solo person or coming as a person who now has a partner who knows that they're doing this. So yeah, for sure, that definitely happened. And there's also a big sort of question about BDSM therapy, and even on my website, I say like therapeutic BDSM, but you have to be very careful when you're talking about it being healing or being able to heal trauma. I personally do think that BDSM is a wonderful avenue and can have very therapeutic properties to it. It is in no way, shape, or form a supplement for traditional therapies with licensed professionals. I think it is a great adjunct. And if done properly, I know a lot of therapists, psychiatrists, psychoanalysts will actually suggest that people seek out a dominatrix.
Really?
Yes. I've had at least 5 people come to me with their therapist saying, why don't you just try it?
Okay. So
yes.
In that session, I'd imagine the the client with the therapist was expressing some need for BDSM or kink or maybe something repressed, and then the therapist goes ahead and says, talking can only go so far.
Exactly.
You need to
experience
this shit. Like, you got to do it firsthand.
Yeah. So for sure. And yes, I do think also people use BDSM in the way that they would use other healing arts like massage, meditation, yoga. It's very similar in what it can do to your body and your mental state when you practice BDSM. Again, I wouldn't say that yoga is therapy, but some people definitely will, be very, very agreeable to the fact that yoga is therapeutic. So in the same way, a BDSM session could be very similar to a yoga session. And there's great physical and mental things that happen when you participate in BDSM. Sort of going outside of your spectrum of what you're qualified to do. That's a touchy subject. So I don't think that Dom should ever say they can heal somebody or that they can help them process through their trauma, because you're really getting into a dangerous situation there. Because if people do have a lot of trauma and you are not skilled in being able to know how to appropriately handle it, then you can both be in danger. So you really need to be careful with what you're doing. And sometimes as a Dom who has been in this situation where people are coming to you for a very therapeutic session, you have to be careful that they understand you are not their therapist. Because sometimes then that responsibility does come onto you and you're not really equipped to deal with it.
So do people start talking about issues that are beyond the sub-dom role sometimes, where we're talking about, I can't tell you why your first wife left you, but we can do other things.
So it's interesting, especially for me. I've been doing this over 3 decades. I've known a lot of my subs over 2 decades. So the level that you get to know the person is intensely crazy, especially since, trust is sort of the very beginning of the relationship. And over years, it grows from there. And I honestly can't tell you how many people have told me that I know them better than anybody else they know. Better than their therapist, better than their brother, better than their wife, because of the level of communication and trust, and also not having people judge. So yes, I definitely think I have been very helpful in having people process things, even if it's just an understanding, non-judgmental ear to listen to your shit that is in your life. And that can be so, healing, just to have somebody who can listen. And they're scared to tell the therapist some of the things that they like or don't like or that are going on. And because they feel they're going to be judged, as sad as that is. A lot of people joke, they're like, "Oh, you should take insurance," that kind of thing. Because we understand there's something really, really positive about what's going on, well outside of the actual activities that are happening.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. That if you're going through an intense physical experience, that other emotions might get cropped up, or boundaries between what's physical and what's emotional, and what is proper to talk about in a session with a Dom. Maybe those lines get crossed where it becomes, like you said, it starts to turn into a therapy session rather than a sub-Dom session. And you said something that made me think, because the calming or the meditative state that I imagine a lot of clients get into, and they come to you. I forget the word that you used. But
subspace.
Subspace, yeah. But you said it was like a cathartic session, or it could be like some sort of a release for the client, like one of those sessions. Do you feel like you get into that space as a Dom? Are you able to get into a meditative space or a cathartic space, or is there so much going on that you're overseeing that it's hard to just completely let go?
Well, it's it's different. It's sort of called top space. And yeah, it can be very meditative in some scenes. Like I have a lot of very heavy sensory deprivation bondage sessions. And a lot of times there's almost no like verbal communication. And in those scenes, it can be very, very therapeutic for me, where it's just like you get into this sort of headspace that's fabulous and amazing. Dom's also kind of, because we are in those situations very much in control and in charge and thinking, but there's also a lot of, cortisol, and there's lots of endorphins, and like all of this stuff is going on. So you get this kind of high, sort of like a runner's high.
Yeah.
Especially when the sessions are longer, 2, 3, 4 hours of that. And then like everybody else, some people crash from it. And there's this lull that comes because you're in this heightened state with all of these feel-good hormones rushing through your body for hours. Yeah. And then you have like a crash at the end of it. So no, Dom's getting into that space for sure.
That makes sense. Like I don't know any intense physical activity that I've done where I'm not at least approaching a different mental headspace, and oftentimes whether it's sex or working out or just even like a longer meditation session or doing heavy breathing, I feel like the mental state starts to like peak into something that wouldn't be there without the physical aspect of it.
Yeah.
So I wanted to show you a scene from the movie Eurotrip. And I was looking for scenes that looked like they wouldn't get pulled down from YouTube, because there are a lot of things, other shows that I've seen recently, like Succession or Billions, that have more recent sub-dom scenes, but it looks like all those get taken down pretty much immediately. So I am going to play you the scene, and then if YouTube allows it, I'm going to overlay it onto the episode. But we can at least react, and you guys will hear the audio, and then hopefully the video will be up there as well. So I'm going to pull up. This is the scene from Eurotrip. It's called Club Vandersex. And just as a background to this scene, so there's a group of people that go to Europe. They're getting fucked up. It's like fresh out of college, or I think it might be like a college road trip. But either way, it's just like a bunch of 21-year-olds getting fucked up in Europe, and they're traveling around. And then the train to go somewhere else is taking a while, so they have a break. And then one of the guys wanders off, and he finds himself in Club Vandersex in Germany. And this is what he encounters. So let me just pull this clip up.
On Vandersex! Hans, rüber!
So, are the girls coming back?
Administer the testicle clamps!
Huh? What? Safe word! What is that? That's not a word, that's a... Ow! 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 Oh, Flugengäntenholen!
Did you say Flügelkämpfheimler?
Yes, yes! For the love of God, Flugenheimler!
Are you sure?
Yes, please.
As you wish.
Bring on the Flügelkämpfheimler!
Wait, what? No!
That's fucking great. That's hysterical. I love it. I mean, it's fabulous. We all, like to make fun of things we don't understand. But that's done in a really fun, cheeky way. I think that's great.
Do you see anything that you're like, oh, that is actually something that would happen, or that's a tool that I would use in my dungeon? Like, what the most realistic things from that scene?
Yeah, actually, I mean, the gear was... I know it's going to sound strange, but even the monkey with the clapping cymbals, like honestly, I do some weird stuff, and I'm like, I saw that, and I was like, oh, those humiliation sessions, I'm going to get me one of those monkeys.
Yeah.
Because, you know, obviously they're making a joke of something that we consider very, very serious, right? But all the gear was there, you know, the bondage and stuff, that was all definitely usable equipment. But what people don't understand is there are plenty of sessions I have that are funny and we laugh and we know how ridiculous some of the stuff that we're doing is. But it's fun. It's play. I mean, we call it play in the scene. So it's like, what time do you want to play kind of thing. So we use play as a word of when we're going to engage in a BDSM scene. And a lot of times it's very light and very fun and it's supposed to be like adult playtime. So it can be silly and you can laugh and have weird things in it, and it could be a lot of fun.
And I assume your safe words are much more pronounceable than an obscure German word that someone doesn't even speak German.
Yeah, no, I mean from an ethical standpoint, you would never do something like that, and you talk to the person about the safe word first, and you make sure they know what it is, and then there's also alternatives like, oh, if you are bound and you are gagged and your hands are in mitts and like you can't snap your fingers or you can't say your safe word. How do we communicate that you need assistance? So, you know, short, sharp grunts or hum happy birthday to you or whatever. Yeah. So it's like there's many options for safe words. So you always know that is available to you.
That reminds me in jiu-jitsu. So obviously if you have one hand free, you can tap the other person and let them know to let go. But sometimes you're in a position where both your arms are locked up.
Right.
So you have to actually say the word. And now that I'm thinking about it, tap, you just say tap, tap, tap.
Yeah.
But that's like the safe word for jiu-jitsu. When someone is just like strangling you so good, they have such a good body lock on you. You're like, yeah, tap, da, da, da. Like, and then, you know, obviously it's over. But that just came to mind when you were describing the, you know, like if you're in a position where you can't speak or like what are you gonna do? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Is there a movie or a TV series that you've watched where the BDSM scenes stand out to you for some reason, whether it's they're the most realistic or, you know, maybe
Billions had some good ones.
Billions has the good ones?
Succession did too. There was some scenes, and obviously it wasn't like a professional scenario, but it was in personal relationships. I thought those were really, really well done.
Yeah, the Billions, I think, does Billions open with the yes, okay. Yeah. That scene was great. There's another scene, or there's a few scenes once Paul Giamatti and his wife break up and he goes back to the dungeons. Those scenes are great. And then the speech, I wish we could play the speech without it getting taken down, but where he just reveals his kink to the public as the judge, and just like the very heartfelt, very like, yeah, I'm into this, and I'm also a person that's in a high office, and those two things don't have to be
they can coexist.
Yeah, exactly. You can coexist as both those things. I just thought that speech was like such a really good fucking scene. Obviously Paul Giamatti is unbelievable as well, but like that whole scene was that sticks in my mind for sure.
Definitely.
So you mentioned some funny moments that happen occasionally during scenes. Is there one that you'd be able to get into without revealing too much detail, or just a moment that genuinely made you laugh and you maybe even had to stop a session because you're like, this is just too fucking hilarious, like we need to pause for a second?
You know, if if it's not the kind of scene where you should be laughing, you gotta suck it up.
Okay.
You gotta hold that shit in. Or at least try. I mean, it is. But I mean, there are some people and some scenes, especially the humiliation scenes, where the person expects you to kind of laugh at them and to not hold that stuff in. Like the more that you're actually laughing at them, at the ridiculousness of the scenario, the better, the more humiliating it is. So yeah, I've had definitely a couple of very interesting scenes. One I had the person karaoke Bohemian Rhapsody.
Okay.
But, I mean, they're like dressed in this ridiculous outfit and they can't sing a lick. And here they are just having to like belt it out, like no real accompaniment, just like going for it. And I was just like, oh my God, this is like one of the best things I've ever seen in my life.
Were they trying to dress up as Freddie Mercury? Was it like a Queen theme thing, or he just loved this song?
So no, but basically it was, I would give two choices of you're going to either do A or B, and you choose. And we had like a whole list of this over the course of like several hours. And he's also into some sort of like gross, like play. I don't know how to say, like I put like eating these bugs. I've got these crickets on Amazon in a can. Oh my God, they smelled so terrible. And sardines and like
good protein though, right?
Sardines.
I've never had them.
And he hates fish, and I know this. So the choice was like these crickets that basically look like roaches. I mean, when I opened the can, I knew there were crickets in there, but I was like, ah! And I literally jumped, and like one of the bugs almost fell out of the freaking can, even though I knew there were bugs in it. So his choice was like eat the fish or eat the crickets. And then as far as the clothing went, it was just like a very sissy outfit. It was pink ruffles, had a diaper underneath it, and then there was, so it's like as we were progressing, he had already eaten, I think he chose the crickets, and then he was dressed in this like adult baby sissy pink outfit with like high heels and, all this insanity. And
what was the other option for the karaoke with Bohemian Rhapsody? Do you remember?
Oh, goodness.
Was it another song?
Whitney Houston. The one that
I think telepathically I know which one you're talking about.
I'm not gonna even attempt to sing it. Where she just belts out,
Yeah.
I'm like, so it was a Whitney Houston song.
I mean, I would go
ridiculous.
I love Whitney Houston, but I'd go Freddie Mercury all day. I mean, Bohemian Rhapsody is just, I mean, if my goal is to lose myself and get into a meditative state and sort of forget what's going on around me, have an out-of-body experience, hitting those high notes, even though I do it absolutely fucking awfully in Bohemian Rhapsody, you just have to go full into it. And, and Whitney Houston goes high too. There's just something about Bohemian Rhapsody where I go, yeah, if I had to sing that in front of someone, that would be just humiliating, but also I think I'd have the most fun with that one for some reason.
It was, and then I had this like blow up sheep. Like it was like, they have
like a plastic blow up.
Yeah. They have the dolls, like the women. Well, this was a sheep. So it had a hole in the back, and it was dressed in like, the sheep had on like stockings, like painted on it and all that stuff.
So it's like a sissy sheep.
It was a sissy sheep. And I was like, well, this is your date for the evening. So I think you should get to know each other. And he had to like pet it and like look into its eyes and kiss it. And I was just like, this is your date. Make her feel comfortable.
Oh my God. I thought you said that he was going to have to bang the sheep while singing Bohemian Rhapsody at the same time.
Not while singing, but probably later on the sheep come into play.
I mean, you're not going to waste. You're not going to waste a hole with a blow up sheep.
There were certain options. Actually, I don't know if it was the sheep that day. I think it was like applesauce and something else. I don't remember. Mayonnaise.
Applesauce and mayonnaise. And that was another choice for what you. I mean, applesauce all day. I would just. That's something that I would eat normally, so I'd have to take applesauce for sure.
Oh no, that's what he was gonna like masturbate into.
Oh, okay. Then that changes it. Then I mean, I'd have to think the oil from the mayonnaise, even though it'd take longer to get the smell off, I'd have to think the lubrication from mayonnaise, because every time you open a jar of mayonnaise, it does have that like vegetable oil layer.
Yeah.
I would just try to get a good amount of that top oil with some of the mayonnaise and just go to town. Applesauce, I feel like that would just drip away very quickly.
Yeah, and I think also at one point he was in a very big pink adult diaper, and he chose to eat cereal out of the diaper. So I put a whole box of Trix in the diaper and a gallon of milk and had this big, massive spoon. And
Love
he
that.
had to like have his cereal that way.
Tricks are not always for kids.
Not always for kids.
Sometimes adults have tricks too.
So, you get very creative. It's actually quite a bit of, and I mean, there was a lot of laughing. It was ridiculousness.
Yeah. So I just want to know one more thing about the Bohemian Rhapsody. So was this an actual karaoke machine where he was singing the lyrics were on the screen? He was singing into the microphone?
YouTube. I had it on YouTube, and I also have like a really cheap microphone. So
gotcha.
It was a microphone, and he got to read it off of.
I love that. I feel like, I mean, you can't walk out of that session as a client less confident. If you're singing Freddie Mercury in sissy clothes, and then you go out to a bar and your friends are doing karaoke and everyone is scared to go first, you're just gonna be like, I was doing this in heels 2 hours ago, with a dominatrix watching me, and then I used mayonnaise to jerk off to a blow up sheep. Of course I'm gonna go first in karaoke in a bar in New York City. Like, that seems like nothing.
And it was
after
videotaped too.
Okay. So you have the evidence. You could be like, look, you gotta, now when you're out in the world, you have to do karaoke, or else I'm just gonna tweet out this video, and that's I'm gonna control you that way.
Yeah,
I love that.
It's pretty good.
So not to bring down the tone too much, but I did want to get into the Armie Hammer Cannibal accusations, because as Armie Hammer has come out recently, he's done the gamut of interviews with Piers Morgan, Bill Maher, like 3 or 4 other podcasts I've heard him on. And I've actually spoke to Jamie Kirchick, who is an investigative journalist, and he was the first one to do a print interview with Armie Hammer. Jamie spoke to Armie out in LA, I think it was maybe a year and a half ago. And when he spoke to Armie, that was the first time that I saw, when I was reading Jamie's article, that Armie Hammer was talking about how big the BDSM and kink played a role in the accusations, and that there were a lot of things that were provided in documentaries about Armie Hammer and provided to the media without the context that this was an agreement between 2 people, and that it was a consensual BDSM kink acts, according to Armie Hammer. And so I just wanted to provide some context before we get into it. So just as a summary, a few years ago, Armie Hammer was canceled from Hollywood for accusations of being a cannibal and a sexual abuser. And since then, it's come to light through the work of Jamie Kirchick and recent Armie Hammer interviews that there's so much more nuance to the story that was maliciously excluded, in my opinion, from the original accusations. And the entire text conversations show the fully willing and excited partners of Armie Hammer reciprocating and even initiating the same types of texts that Armie was canceled for. And there's a quote that I jotted down from Piers Morgan where Armie Hammer says, he says, quote, "In my sexual relationships with people, I was very cognizant and very aware about presenting that these are my desires. These are my kinks. Do any of these sound good to you? Let's move slowly through this. If there's anything you want to try, we can try them. And we'll make sure we do it safely and with communication and with healthy boundaries. There was nothing to be gained from me having a sexual experience that my partner didn't appreciate or enjoy." And then something else that came out was that Armie Hammer, was a sexual abuser because he was into rape role play. And so he commented on that as well, where he said, quote, It was not only with her knowledge, but also with her planning. She said, meet me at this Starbucks and follow me home and then come in the door and do this. It was even awkward and clumsy, and it was something we tried once and she wanted to try, and I wanted to be an accommodating partner. And he talks about using safe words like orange meant pause, or I'm feeling overwhelmed, but I'm still into it. And then red meant stop completely. And there's other texts from Armie Hammer that we can get into in a little bit. But I just wanted to pause there to ask you, with everything that's come out and just like recent comments from Armie Hammer, and I'm obviously, and I'm not expecting you to have watched the full interviews. This is just slight context, and anyone who's listening to this can check out the Piers Morgan interview, the Bill Maher interview, and just decide for yourself what you think about what Armie Hammer is saying. But just from this extra context here that was not available when the HBO documentary came out and when he was canceled from Hollywood, what are your thoughts on the Armie Hammer situation, the accusations, and then this sort of rebirth of him giving context with the kink BDSM roleplay being behind a lot of the texts that were leaked?
Yeah, I actually didn't know that much about this. So again, in a situation where it's one person said one thing, one person said another thing, we never really know exactly what's going on. And obviously, if these things happened without the person's consent, or if boundaries were not kept, that's a huge issue. But if information was withheld, talking about the fact that, there were boundaries that were set up and these people did completely know what was going on, participate, willingly consent, then obviously it's really a shame that information wasn't part of what was going on, because if two people are willing participants in consensual play, then it shouldn't be an issue. I don't know how all of that started. Like, were there just accusations against him that people said that?
So from my memory, from when I was preparing for the interview with Jamie Kirchick, and if you search Jamie Kirchick, Armie Hammer, he has a 30-minute read online that people can check out, where he has context from Armie and then some context from the accusers through the outlets that they came out to, and then the full texts that were shared between Armie Hammer and his accusers. And I remember, and I could be wrong about this, but I think it was the girl Effie who came out and accused Armie Hammer of sexual abuse and taking advantage of her, crossing consent lines. And she provided text messages and DMs to show this. And then other accusers came out. There's another woman, Courtney, that came out and also showed texts that ended up being partial texts. Everyone piled on. A lot of these texts were mentioning cannibalism and I want to eat you. And the media took that and ran with it. And, as they do with a lot of things without context, but that seem like very extreme. It's just like Armie Hammer's a cannibal. Does Armie Hammer eat people? All this stuff. And then, to my understanding, he just kind of went away. The LAPD didn't end up charging him with anything. The case didn't go anywhere, but he just went away for a long time and then came back a few months ago into the public eye, and now giving very long form interviews on Piers Morgan, on Bill Maher, on just like a lot of long form podcasts, just talking about very awkward things and a lot of the just like the things from that were sensual to like things that were awkward or even funny, and things that were like just walking people through like his mindset, why this was occurring. And obviously there's multiple parts to every single story. So you can't just take one person's word for it. But I appreciated the context that he was providing with, this is what I was thinking, or, I sent these texts when I was inebriated and sitting in a hotel room alone, and I was getting positive feedback. So I just, I just ran with it, and it was what it was. But yeah, I believe it started with that first girl, Effie, coming out back in like 2017 or whenever it was. And then that kind of just started the whole shitstorm.
Yeah, I mean, again, no idea. I'm sure if somebody's coming forward, then whatever their claim is needs to be taken seriously. If there was no follow-up, that doesn't mean anything either way. And it's a tricky situation, because as somebody who's been doing this for a long time, even when you agree to something, sometimes you do it, and then afterwards you realize, hey, that was too much. I agreed but shouldn't. Or in maybe one of these cases where they're saying, I said no, and it went further, and the other person's like, well, I just kind of went with it. Whenever you have this sort of a dynamic, it can be very, very tricky to make sure that everybody stays within the boundaries that are set, and understanding that if boundaries are crossed, what happens in that scenario. Because sometimes it happens, like people coming into the industry, sometimes they ask me, like, how do you know, like, if you're going to cross the boundary on somebody if they don't know what their boundary is?
That's
That's
a really good point.
It's a very good question.
That applies to anything.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do you know until you potentially do it and potentially cross that boundary? So you have to communicate enough with the person to know if they are wanting to push their boundaries, if they're wanting to find out what those boundaries are, that there's a lot of communication. And especially if a boundary is crossed, that they feel very comfortable saying, okay, we did this, that was not good for me. Yeah. I do not want to do this again. And for the person to be okay enough to be willing to continue, because you're chancing it. Like, if you have a bad experience, or if something pushes you or is really negative, you might not want to go back to that. So it could be really, scary stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as a dom, when you're coming in to a session and you have a client that has pre-established boundaries, and you know that you're starting at a point and you still haven't hit the boundary yet, but like you said, boundaries can be have a life of their own depending on how you're feeling that day, or what you've experienced, emotions, things like that. It's shifting. How do you, as a professional, sort of manage the lines with the shifting boundaries of a client on a particular day? Are you checking in? Like, you have a set time, like every 10 minutes, I'm going to just check in, even if the client doesn't say this is, something I don't want? Or is it more just like reading body language, reading verbal language?
It really depends on the person, for sure. And one thing that I say across the board is, scenes and sessions and playtime get better the more you know the person. So the more you know them, the more you know how to navigate situations, and the more comfortable you also feel pushing boundaries. Sometimes people come to me, they're like, I want to try this, I want to try that, I've never done this. I was like, whoa. I don't know you. And you're asking me to do all these things that you have never had happen to you before. Maybe this is way off of into left field for you. You don't know that. Like, we have to start here. I get to know you. I get to know your body language, how you respond. I get feedback from that. Like, okay, this is what we did. How was all of that? And then I can internalize, like, this is how they responded. All of this was okay. Or something isn't okay. And I learned to pick up what wasn't okay. And we talk about that. Oh, that was too much. Yeah. So after you know all of this stuff and you're way more confident in being able to read the person and their nonverbal cues as well as their verbal cues and their body language and their breathing and all of the other things, then I feel more comfortable pushing boundaries. Yeah. I really don't like when people come to me and they're like, I just want all, everything.
Yeah, all or nothing.
Yeah. And, I've had people come and it's like a first time encounter. They're like, well, I really want to be pushed, and the past 3 experiences I've had I don't feel that they've really gone there, and I really want to do that. And so you're like, okay, like let's do this, and have that understanding. And sometimes it happens, and the person in this one instance was like, this is too much. And we stopped about
Yeah.
15 minutes in. And they're like, it's not your fault. I asked for all of this. You did it perfectly, and it was too much.
Yeah.
And so then we had like 3 or 4 other scenes, and it took us a while to find the middle ground. You know, so it was like we went back and forth.
Repetition.
And it was like, you know, they didn't consider them particularly successful sessions, whatever that means. I said, you have too many expectations if you think something's successful or not. It should just be about the experience. And I was like, I considered them all very successful because we learned and you learned what you want, what you don't want, and you kind of stuck with it. If you would have went to another person, you're starting from ground zero.
Yeah.
So it really is that trust building and getting to know each other that is essential. So for some of my scenes, you know, I don't really have to check in. Like I know just based on what they're doing, if it's going to be too much, if it's getting too much. And then with other people, I'll just check in if I think checking in needs to be, you know, like if they just seem a little bit, something seems a little off, you know, be like, are you okay? Try not to do that too much because a lot of people really want to feel like they're in the space and, you know, they don't have control and, you know, you're guiding everything. But sometimes it's just really necessary to check in and make sure things are okay.
And all these interactions, it's happening in a complex mishmash of 2 people going back and forth and trying to figure out each other's boundaries, what someone likes, what they don't like, what they're willing to, you know, push the needle on, what they're not willing to. And all this is happening behind closed doors. And I think a lot of the Armie Hammer situation, especially the sort of like the Puritan outburst about a text to someone saying, I want to eat you, makes Armie Hammer a cannibal. I think there's this, when you take things that happen behind closed doors and you put them out in the daylight where, and we spoke about this when the dominatrix with the full latex suit with just her mouth open is marching into a city council meeting demanding funds to build a dom dungeon. It's like you're shifting, you're mixing the context, and you're not having a pre-context. You're not having you're having a story and you're having details that are hitting the public that is not familiar with the intricacies of this relationship and the intricacies of the BDSM dynamics or kink dynamics. And so you have people judging something, reading a New York Times story at 9 a.m. in a cafe about Armie Hammer saying, you know, I want to eat you, or I want to put your whole head in my mouth, and, you know, I want to do rape role play. And you're someone who's always been a traditional person just reading this going like, oh my God, like this is, and you're just sipping your coffee. And there's it just makes it just exponentially more of a shitstorm, in my opinion, when you have these things where the context is behind closed doors and people are agreeing to that to happen in a private setting. Almost like when a stand-up comic is working out a set and they say something that's super over the line, but there's 60 people in a dark basement and one person's recording on their Apple Watch and they go, I'm going to release this to the world. That stand-up is trying to figure out the boundaries of what he or she can or cannot say. And then they're going to do that set 1,000 times before they record something for Netflix or YouTube, or we're going to release it. So what you were saying just made me think about like that whole dynamic of it. This is a pre-agreed to relationship that happens in this dungeon. And then if stories about details come out about it and it ends up being on the front page, you know, of the New York Post or whatever, of course people are going to react in
anything out of context,
an irrational way, because there's no context. There's no experience.
Anything out of context can be taken and misconstrued, and media is big business. You know, it is big business. So, you know, finding the truth in all of that, and no matter what the subject is really, really hard. Yeah. So, you know, we don't know what happened. We don't know if lines were crossed. We will never know because we were not there. So what media does with information is just what media does. And if they see a headline and if they see something they can sensationalize, they are going to jump on that.
Oh, yeah.
And that's just the culture that we live in.
Yeah, and you can save yourself from a lot of legal trouble with a question mark when you say Armie Hammer is a cannibal, question mark. Even though I think there's, you're not technically saying it, but it's what these companies do to save their asses is they have a sensational headline, but there's no proof of what they're accusing. So then they hide behind the question mark and people are like, oh my God, Armie Hammer, cannibal. And then you're just like, it becomes an endless retweet shitstorm. So yeah.